What is up, gamers? I hope everyone's BCS season has been going very well. Mine was, Anyway, now that my competitive season is over, I want to take some time trying out some new fun decks. What better way to start than with some good old snake action? So here's the game plan. Our main ride target is Megalonozuchi. He has the skills that act on Vanguard once per turn. You can bind one or more cards from your soul, and he gets the skill that he gets the names of all the stealth units in there that are grade 1 or higher. He also has act once per turn, Cablast 1, put 2 rear guards in the soul, and you search your deck for up to 2 cards with the same name as him and call them the rear guard, and they get plus 5k until end of turn. His last effect is if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, all of your stealth units that have the same name as Megalonozuchi can attack from the back row. So what this means is that Megalonozuchi gets the names of all of those stealth units, which is really important for this game plan. Our primary target is Yasui. Yasui's effect doesn't really matter. We want it so we can use the history collection stride Ushimitsu Train. Ushimitsu Train has the effects that act in G-Zone if your Vanguard is a grade 3 stealth rogue of Revelation Yasui, and you have not gotten an imaginary gift this fight. You discard a total of grade 3 or higher, and then you stride into Train from your G-Zone, and then you can turn up another copy of Train from your G-Zone, and you get 2 Excel markers. He also has that all of his on-hit effects activate even if they don't hit, and his on-hit effect is whenever it hits a Vanguard, you choose one of your rear guards, and you call 2 copies of it from your deck, and then at the end of the turn, you put those units that you called off of Train to the bottom of the deck. If you don't know what an Excel marker is an additional front row rear guard circle that you can attack from. There's Excel 1 and Excel 2. Excel 1 gives that unit plus 10k power, and Excel 2 gives it plus 5k power, and you draw a card whenever you get it. Basically, we will be able to get a strong multi-attack turn, and we're able to set up our game state really easily with this combo. In order to do this though, we need to find Yasui in our soul by turn 3. So we have some additional standard cards in here with Shoujo Doji and Forktail. Forktail is our main Soul Charger and Yasui searcher. We want to see as many of these as possible early to give us the highest chance possible of finding Yasui in our soul. Shoujo Doji acts as both a Yasui and a Forktail searcher whenever you ride it. It can set up our early game to be aggressive while also still giving us more opportunity to find Yasui into soul. Even with this pairing, there is one more card that we need to help solidify our consistency. Introducing Idohiki Girl. Idohiki Girl has the effects that auto Vanguard rearguard once per turn. Whenever it attacks while boosted, you counterblast 1, and you can call any card from your deck that has the same name as one of your units other than itself. And then it has the Ride Fixer ability. So at the beginning of your ride phase, if this card's in your hand, if your Vanguard is grade 1 or lower, you can discard Idohiki Girl, look at top 5 cards of your deck, and add any grade 2 or lower card to your hand. Idohiki brings in all the consistency of this deck. You have the first effect where in the early game, you can have Forktail boost her. Then you use Idohiki's skill to search another Forktail and get another Soul Charge search off. She also has the Ride Fixer ability that you can use to help find a Shoujo Doji or Forktail as well. Idohiki's on attack skill also is an attack extender later in the game. This is the primary engine of the deck. We start fleshing it out with Frightsicle and Hidden Scroll. Frightsicle has this effect that whenever it attacks, you may have it get plus 5k until end of battle, and if you do, it goes to the bottom of your deck at the end of that battle. And if it was placed by a card ability this turn, you also draw a card. And then Hidden Scroll is our stand trigger. So it has GB1, you put it on top of your deck whenever you call it, and then you choose one of your rear guards and call 2 copies of it from your deck, and at the end of the turn, those units go to the bottom of the deck. On our grade 3 turn, we want to be able to stride Train, call Frightsicle, call Hidden Scroll. Hidden Scroll goes back to deck, you call 2 more Frightsicles, and then those were called by ability, so you swing with those. They both go to the bottom of the deck, and you draw a card for each one. And then you swing with Train. Train's on-hit effect will clone that original Frightsicle again. So you call 2 more Frightsicles out, and then you're able to draw 2 off of those. Just from that play alone, you draw 4 cards. That's not counting the triple drive Train has, the draws you have from Excel 2s, or potential draw triggers. So after we do all of that, How do we win? We try to win turn 4 most of the time. We stride Izushi Otome as our main finisher. It has the skills that act once per turn, can blast 1, put a normal unit from your drop to the bottom of the deck, and flip up a G unit. You choose up to 2 of your rear guards, and you can call a copy of each of them. It also has continuous. All of your units with the same card name as another of your units can attack from the back row. So because of the back row effect and the 2 Excel markers, we have at minimum 8 attacks naturally from this setup. We also get access to Persona Ride from the Snake. And since we have 2 Excel markers as well, our Snake is giving an additional 50k power at a minimum. Even though that is a lot of additional power that Snake is giving, that's still not quite enough. So we are running Fantasy Petal Storm Shirayuki in the deck as well. Shirayuki has the effects that whenever it's placed on Vanguard, Rearguard, or Guardian Circle, you can Soul Blast 2, choose 3 units in your opponent's front row, and they get minus 5k until end of turn. If it was placed on Vanguard or Guardian Circle, they get minus 10k instead of 5k. It also has the Vanguard effect that whenever it attacks and doesn't hit, you can add another copy of it from your drop zone back to your hand. Essentially, we are still trying to build enough soul to use Shirayuki 3 to 4 times. It gives us that extra push we need to close out the game, and we also have the potential of extra attacks through Shiburaku Victor, Ito Hikigyo, and stand triggers. And because of the amount of deck thinning we are doing through Forktail and Shoujo Doji and Snake, being able to call normal units from our deck, we will naturally just hit more triggers, and we are able to filter our stand triggers back into our deck. So on our Izushi Otome turn, we are able to use those stand triggers to get even more additional attacks off. And with all that being said, here's our deck. Hello, fancy seeing you here. This video happens to be sponsored by, well, me. I have opened up a Patreon. Alongside this video, there is a video going more in depth about the deck itself, where I do test hands, I go over combos, and I also talk about other options you can use within the deck. You also get early access to everything I'm working on, be it animations I'm learning, deck lists or tier lists for future videos, and you even get early releases of videos as well. You supporting me really helps me being able to consistently bring out more quality content for you guys to watch. And yeah, thank you for listening, and let's get back to the video. I wanted to take this deck out for a real spin. What better place than the biggest online event of the year, Bushiroad Rumble Online. This will be a real proving ground showing off how strong this deck can be. I only have one chance to do well though, because I am casting for the North American BRO. So this run is the only one I got. I don't expect to top, but I do want to have a good showing with it. Round 1, I'm against Gasteel. This deck's gimmick is to utilize Sharhot and Kiss Kill Lyra turn 3 to farm a ton of soul and get 2 protect markers to more easily survive the following turn. Then they try to go for Gasteel to close out the game with its absurd late game. I'm going second. My opponent rides Fu and uses its skill. My hand was pretty bad, so using this Fu really helped me try to fix my hand. I decide for my deck, going fast early is better for me since I can't 0 to 6 easily. My deck becomes very lethal when they are at a high damage count, so I try to force pieces out of their hand as quickly as possible. I call Forktail and it gets me a Yasui in the soul. During this next turn, I use my Ride Fixer to try to find a Shoujo Doji or an Ataka. I end up finding neither and having to add Frightsicle to hand and ride it. I'm able to drop another Forktail and just try to filter my deck out in the process. I get them to 2 damage. The opponent gets to the Kiss Kill Sharhot play and starts really accelerating their soul. They have the Demonted Executioner and 2 monochromes along with it, so they are really close to the 20 soul already. I decide during this turn I want to try to stay at 1 damage. I can't stop the Gasteel or win by then, so now I have to try to find a way to farm as many cards as possible. On my turn, I end up riding Yasui. I call a Frightsicle and stride into train. I choose Excel 1 here so my sickles can swing a bit harder. I use Hidden Skull to call 2 more Forktails for my deck to try to deck thin even more. The more I deck thin, the higher chance I have to hit defensives on the opponent's turn. My Shirayukis also don't work defensively in this matchup, so I call one down to make the opponent minus 5k for the turn. I swing a couple times to try to force a lot of cards from their hand or get them to a high damage. They G-Guard with Saint German, which gives their Vanguard resist. So now if I call more Shirayukis off my train, I cannot lower their power even more. I check 3 blanks on my Vanguard swing, and I call 2 more Frightsicles out. I swing with my Frightsicles a few more times and get my hand to a healthy state. The only issue is I have almost no shield value since I drove check 2 grade 3s and a grade 2. My draws also weren't the best, so I can very well lose on this turn. Thankfully, my opponent calls a Fu and lets me cycle a grade 3 in my hand, then calls another one so I can do it again. I end up drawing 2 crits in their place, which makes living a lot more manageable but still hard. They call the original Gastille and copy the skills of Baleful Repressor from their soul. So now it has plus 10k and grade 0 guard restrict. They then call Quinlu and use that effect on that Gastille. So now that Gastille can only be guarded by Blitz Orders and G-Guards. They call another Baleful Repressor, but don't have a Quinlu with it. We go into battle phase, and the Gastille procs. I put the ticket in my hand to damage, so now I'm staying at 1 damage still. All of my units go to 1 power, all of their units gain a crit. And now my auto abilities are turned off, so that means I can't use Perfect Guards, G-Guards, or any of my Shirayuki effects during this turn. I end up taking the first swing, giving me a draw trigger, which is really handy in this spot. I make the Vanguard 2 to pass, and he checks 2 blanks. He ends up going in the Forfax and shuffles 3 crits back into the deck. I conclude the deck has 3 crits, a stand, and a normal unit in there. I'm probably having to go to 6 damage here. I want to bait the opponent into giving crits to their Vanguard because I can't guard the Repressor. If they hit only 2 crits and I hit a defensive heal or over trigger, I can live through this turn. They end up checking a crit and gave it to Vanguard, and then checked a second one and gave it to Vanguard as well. And then the last check was a blank. On my damage checks, I hit defensive OT and was able to survive the turn. My opponent passes the turn back to me, and with only 2 cards in deck, they just take their last damage and I win. Yes, I went through the over trigger and I accept that. The main thing though is I guarded and deck thinned to a point where that became a viable way to live through the turn. I was playing for it since the start of the game through my Forktails because I know how this matchup usually goes. Especially when you go second against it, you sometimes have to get lucky if you don't get to crush them fast enough. Round 2, I'm against the Eradicator. The recent ban list did hit this deck, choice restricting Demolition Dragon and Sweep Command Dragon. This variant still leans into Sweep Command Dragon, so the early game of this deck is a lot weaker. I go first. I ride Ataka and find nothing. He rides Nusku and adds a Zuitan. I go to 1 damage. I ride Shoujo Doji and find Frightsicle and Rainy Madam. I call the Sickle to back row to save it for my train turn. Eradicators don't have a way to hit back row rearguards early on, so I can safely do this. I call a Forktail, which puts another Shoujo Doji in the soul. Then I call the Ride Fixer. On swing, I call Forktail and find my Yasui to put in the soul. He guards my first swing and takes the Vanguard swing. I hit a stand and swing with Ito Hikigil again. My opponent goes to 2 damage early, which is really great for me. My opponent rides Spark Rays and adds Nusku to hand. They call the Nusku and add the Cho-O to hand. They then call double Zuiten. I take the Vanguard swing and realize they have a 9k and a 17k swing. The Zuitens are stuck if my rearguard stays. So on my damage trigger, I gave the power to Ito Hikigil, shutting out their skills. They attack Vanguard for 17k and I got it. The opponent's hand seems really cluttered, and now I can take full advantage of them not being able to utilize those Zuitans. I ride Snake, find Yasui, Shoujo Doji, and Rainy Madam. I use Shoujo Doji and call it out, then use Snake and call out 2 Rainy Madams from my deck. I then go into train with double Excel. I have the Hidden Skull in my hand to call 2 more Sickles out. I swing with Ito Hikigil first, so I can play for a potential stand trigger off of my drive check. It's also my smallest number that doesn't beat over a defensive. They decide to take and didn't hit a defensive. They guard 1 Frightsicle and take another, hitting a heal. I swing with Vanguard and they block with the over trigger. I check 3 blanks but get 2 more Frightsicles out. Both of them still beat over the Spark Rays, and my opponent goes to 4 damage, and I have a 12 card hand. I should be good with living this turn. They ride Sweep Command Dragon and bind 2. Then they ride Exterminate and draw 4 cards. They bring up the Nusku, call Sweep Command, and a Rising Phoenix. They do Exterminate to give plus 40k to front row and start swinging. I take the first 2 swings and perfect guard the Vanguard swing. They check a crit and I guard with over trigger, making it through the turn. I Persona Ride Snake and stride Izushi Otome. I'm looking to win on this turn. I call a Shirayuki to minus power, then call a second. I call a Forktail to fuel my soul more, and use Vanguard skill to clone both my Forktails to get 2 more soul and deck them further. I call Hidden Skull and call 2 more Shirayukis off of it, and I use both of their effects, bringing my opponent to negative 8,000 power, while all my units got power boosted from Persona Ride. To play around Impede, I swing back row first, and Impede comes out, removing my Forktails. I then swing Shirayuki from the back row for 12k. They guard it. I swing with the other Shirayuki for 27k, and they go to 5 damage. I swing Ito Hikigil for 19k, which they guard. I then bring out Shibaraku Victor from G-Zone. I swing another Shirayuki for 17k, and the opponent goes to 6 and loses. This game was a very cookie-cutter showing of how this deck plays. You build a giant hand from Sickles and set up a ton of soul through Snake and Forktail, and have an insane late game with Persona Ride plus Shirayuki minusing power. Game 3, I go against another Eradicator, but this time I'm going second. I find the Snake early and drive check a Shoujo Doji. They end up having to ride Zuitan, and I go to 1 damage. I I use the Ride Fixer early to try to find a Forktail. I find a Frightsicle again off of it. I ride Shoujo Doji and call Ataka and put a Shoujo Doji into Soul. I then call my Ride Fixer and attack. I use Ride Fixer skill to call another Ataka out behind my Vanguard. I swing with my Vanguard and they take it. On their turn, they go Dragonic Vanquisher. They build a very simple board. I have a Heal Guard to become base 20k power for the turn, and I decide to take the Vanguard hit. I hit a defensive heal, putting me at 30k base. Zoas then binds 2 cards for my drop zone. Here I'm thinking about what to ride because I don't have the Yasui and Soul. I end up riding Yasui and calling a Frightsicle. I stride Train and call 2 more Frightsicles out. I call a Snake out to try to play around Impede Dragon easier. They do the Impede and I bind the non-sickle rear guards. I then debate if I want to play around the second heal or not, since I only have 1 Frightsicle left in deck. I can swing with this Frightsicle and bot deck it, then do Train to get 2 more. But if they have another G-Guard, then I'll get a lot less out of it. I go the safer play and swing with Train first. I check 2 crits on the swing, pushing them to 5 damage, and I get the 3rd sickle back out. They check 0 defensives. I swing for 19k and they go into Bulwark. Bulwark then binds my Frightsicle before it's able to use its skill. My opponent ends up guarding the rest of the attacks, and now it's back to his turn. On his turn, he rides Sweep Command Dragon and then strides Exterminate Dragon. They drop a full board and start trying to push me for game. I check a defensive draw on the first swing. I guard the second swing, take the Cho-Oh, and perfect guard the Vanguard. They check a crit and a heal. Now I have to block 2 of these attacks. I G-Guard into my Flip G-Guard, which is a 25k shield, and it can also put cards back into my deck whenever I guard with them. I also use a Guardian ticket to block the attack. I take the next swing, and then I Perfect Guard the last attack. The Perfect Guard then goes to the bottom of the deck. I'm in a do-or-die situation here. I ride Shirayuki to get the 3rd Excel marker, and then minus 10k from the opponent. I then stride into Izushio Otome. I call 2 Forktails to thin out and get more soul. I then call a Shirayuki and minus power. I do Vanguard skill to clone Shirayuki and Forktail. I then call Hidden Skull and put it back without calling anything. I swing for 8k versus the negative 8k. My opponent G-Guards into the last Impede, making me remove 2 Rios. I swing for 13k, which they take. They guard my 17k Shirayuki, and I call a Shiburaku Victor for my G-Zone. They guard that 20k swing. I then swing with Vanguard, which they perfect guard. I check a stand trigger to restand Shiburaku Victor, and was able to close out with the overwhelming amount of attacks. This game was really close. My opponent having 3 G-Guards they could use made building a field really hard, and constantly losing my pieces forever made it worse. I had to preserve my Shirayukis as long as possible, and was able to clutch it out with all the deck fitting and putting stands back into my deck. Game 4 is actually the game I played on stream. I am facing against Mega Colony. Going into this matchup, I was worried about Ghidorah's shutting out a ton of my combo potential, and it gives me less breathing room late game. At the very least, this variant of Murakumo can play faster since you are calling cards down earlier anyway. I go first. I don't have a grade 1 in my hand, but I do have 2 Ride Fixers. I reveal them both and discard one of them. I find Ataka and I keep the other fixer in my hand. I then ride Ataka and add the snake to my hand. I discard a Perfect Guard because my hand is all pieces. My opponent rides Brilliant Blister and hits a crit. I heal on the second hit. I ride Shoujo Doji and find the Yasui in the soul and call another Shoujo Doji from deck. I then call another Shoujo Doji from hand. My opponent hits a defensive trigger on my first swing, and on my Vanguard swing, he no guards and I hit a stand trigger. He is sitting at base 16k, and all of my attacks can only go up to 15k from the stand trigger. So my opponent gets through this turn pretty unscathed. They ride Stamping Red and Cradle Marker my Shoujo Doji, and then call another one. On the Vanguard swing, they hit another crit, putting me to 3. And then since my hand is all pieces, I can't guard this last attack, so I just go to 4 damage. On my turn, I ride the snake, I bind Ataka, Shoujo Doji, and Yasui. I call a unit to suck in for the snake, but I didn't count the total units that are out of my deck. I was out of Yasuis and Shoujo Dojis from my deck, and I only had 1 Ataka left in deck, so I end up only calling 1 rearguard out. I then stride into Train. I call Frightsicle and then Hidden Skull to call 2 more Frightsicles out. I then call Ito Hikigo and Shirayuki. I use Shirayuki to minus power. I swing 19k to the 4k and they take it. I swing 19k and they use a heal guard to plus 10k to Vanguard. I swing with my Vanguard and they use Sanctitude on it. I check a draw trigger, then the over trigger to restand my Vanguard and it gains 100 million. I then check a stand but have nothing to stand. Train calls out 2 more Frightsicles and he heal guards the first one. I swing with a different one for 29k versus the 24k. My dumbass though said 24k, so they just intercepted the attack and we thought it was enough. I swing with my Vanguard and he no guards it, and I check a crit and a heal off of it. They don't hit a defensive, and I call 2 sickles back out. My deck size gets really small, so I decide not to swing, and all of those sickles go back to bottom. They ride Dove Spid, which was the card I was afraid of, since it mills 2 cards from my deck. If he was able to do it enough, then I would be in a very scary position and be very close to deck out. They stride Ghidorah, do all the things Ghidorah does, and only has that and ends up calling Usopp Dragon on its attack. I use a Perfect Guard on Vanguard, and they hit a crit. They swing with Usopp again, and I use another Perfect Guard here. On my following turn, I end up Persona Riding and then striding Izushi Otome. I call 2 Forktails to thin out my deck more and get 2 more soul. I then call a Shirayuki to minus power. I use Izushi Otome to put more cards back into my deck, and then I use Hidden Skull to put a stand trigger back into my deck. I call a second Shirayuki and minus more power. They take the first swing and then take the next one for game. This matchup is normally really hard, and my opponent seemed to have all the nuts to be able to live through a turn easier with that double heal and Sanctitude on my grade 3 turn. They also hit 2 crits on me early on. Now this game may look like I only won because of the over trigger, and my luck is very insane, and yes, the over trigger did win me this game, but if you look at how my opponent's luck was basically the rest of this game, he was luckier than me in every other regard. So my over trigger looks a lot flashier, but in almost every other aspect of that game, my opponent was doing a lot better in the luck department. And yes, I think the over trigger should still be banned. This isn't me defending it. This is me defending it in this specific case. Round 5, I go against Mooserax, aka Dave Vecht, aka the reigning premium world champion. He is playing Steam Maidens. Steam Maiden utilizes the bind zone for extra attacks throughout a turn. In order to win this game, I have to play out of my mind. I'm going second, and he rides Elul and is able to draw some cards off of it. I ride Ataka and find an early heal to have for any potential grade 3 shenanigans. I swing and pass. They ride Elul and they call down a Lost Gear Dog 8 and find the V Chronojet. And then they call Karunta and use Karunta to find Naboo. I end up taking the first hit and then the Vanguard swing. I see no defensives, and I end up guarding the last attack. I ride Shoujo Doji and find the Yasui to put in the soul and call a Forktail off of it. Forktail gives me another Forktail in soul. I then call Ataka and find the snake. I then call the Ride Fixer. I swing with the Ride Fixer and call another Forktail, which then gives me another soul. He takes the rearguard swing, then minus 2 crits my Vanguard swing. For his grade 3 turn, he rides V Chronojet and goes into Time Leaper Dragon. He then calls the Gear Cat and adds Elul to hand. I heal guard the first swing. If I maintain a low damage count here, then it makes surviving the stride turn a lot easier. He swings with Time Leaper Dragon and is able to call Enterana off of it, which then calls Gear Cat back out. I no guard the Vanguard, leaving it to a 1 to pass. He checks his blue over trigger and is now swinging for 2 crit. He also adds the heal back into his hand. I check a heal during the damage check, and I'm able to guard the last attack. He decides to ride down and passes it back to me. I ride the snake, and I have a pretty solid setup here. I bind Yasui, Shoujo Doji, and Forktail off Snake skill. I then use Snake to call out Forktail and Shoujo Doji. I stride into train and get 2 Excel markers. I call 2 Frightsicles and a Rainy Madam. I swing 14k and he intercepts. I then swing with Vanguard and he no guards. I rip a stand, Shirayuki, and a sickle. Train then calls 2 more Frightsicles out. My opponent really doesn't want me to get the Shirayuki back to hand off Rainy Madam. He decides to take everything. I put him to 5 damage and force him to guard something, and my Rainy Madam activates. When they start their turn, I do realize I messed up by giving him that 5th damage though. Now he has the 3 counterblasts needed to get an insane amount of multi-attack off. They use Renovate Wing and get 2 heals out of it. He swings at my Shoujo Doji, which I don't block. He swings 28k Vanguard. Looking at my hand, I need a defensive to make this turn a lot more livable. I decide to take it and hit a crit that draws me a card. He calls Elul and binds a grade 3 to be 39k to my 23k. I use Shirayuki to minus power and a 10k shield to block it. He then calls Elul from bind zone and attacks. I take this hit and don't get a defensive. He swings Shlishma and calls out Elul and Elul. Finds a grade 4 off Elul. I use Shirayuki to minus the power of the front row and drop a 10k for a 2 to pass. He checks 3 blanks. The Elul swings and I was able to guard it. He then calls Shlishma over that spot. He then attacks. I perfect guard it. He swings with Elul for 22k and my Vanguard is 23k, so it doesn't hit. He calls Elul from bind zone and I PG that swing too. I live through the turn with 1 card in hand. The card I saved was a Persona Ride though. I draw a heal trigger for turn, giving me the stride fodder I need. So I Persona Ride and then stride into Shibaraku Victor. I need to find more cards in my hand. I call down my hand and then I use Shibaraku Victor skill to check top 7. I add a Rainy Madam and an Ito Hiki Girl to my hand. I swing with Forktail for 18k. He guards which gives me Shibaraku Victor in play. I swing Rainy Madam, and he uses Bear Lock for it. I use Rainy Madam's skill to add Shirayuki back to hand. I swing with the Rearguard Shibaraku Victor for 30k. He hard G-guards into Rafana and calls out the countercharge Hog. I play for a stand trigger and swing with Ito Hikigo, and my only call target is a crit. I have a stand and an OT in back that I can still shoot for. He then G-guards into a Bear Lock again. I call Shibaraku Victor again, and he Sanctitudes my Vanguard. I check a heal, and he is forced to Perfect Guard my last attack. I pass my turn knowing I have to deal with quite a bit to get through since he will have one counterblast. Then he top decks another countercharge Hog, putting him in full combo. At this point, I know I have to bank on a defensive overtrigger to live. I damage check a draw trigger, and I drew my overtrigger. Now this turn looks a bit livable, but I have to calculate it out. He swings with Vanguard, and I take a bit to figure out how much the rest of his attacks will be. I G-guard into a Xena and make it a 1 to pass. He checks 2 blanks. I then use the G-guard skill to bounce a crit back to hand that I can guard with. He attacks with A-Lul for 39k, and it takes 20k to block. His next 2 swings are going to be 45k and 35k. I realize I'm 10k short, and I end up taking this hit, and I lose. This game wasn't down to one big misplay, but a ton of really small ones that added up. I forgot to use Shoujo Doji for my bind zone at the end there to get me an extra attacker, which would have won me the game there. I also put him to 5 damage, overvaluing the Shirayuki in my hand in that position, but I gave him a whole extra line of attacks in that process. Overall though, it was an amazing game, and I'm happy I can compete with the current world champ on the same playing field. Round 6, I'm fighting Rivia. Rivia is a deck that tries to ride skip from grade 0 to grade 2 turn 1. When they hit grade 3, they can ride Loris and then go their history collection stride and then be able to stride on the following turn. If this deck goes first, it's extremely oppressive since they will be striding while you are not even grade 3 yet. Luckily, I go first in this game. I ride Ataka, find Shirayuki, and then discard it. Alright, and now here is their turn 1. They ride Courage. Because they didn't ride a Rivia, the starter moves to the rear guard. They use Courage's effect to put the starter back into Soul and add a Rivia grade 1 to hand. They then get to Superior Ride it and add another grade 1 Rivia to hand. They use that one's effect to Superior Ride it again and search for grade 3 Rivia. They then use Selena from hand to put it into Soul and Superior Ride the grade 2 Rivia from the deck. They then use the grade 2 Rivia from their hand and Superior Ride that, allowing them to call 2 grade 1 Rivias from the Soul. They attack for 8k. I use a heal guard to put myself at 18k. They swing with Vanguard and don't break the 1 to pass. They finally end their turn. So in this situation, my hand is actually really bad. I have a Yasui, an Ito Hikigo, my Overtrigger, and a mix of Perfect Guards and Sand Triggers. I have no pieces. I can't be aggressive. And I have no setup for my next turn. My shield value is also very lackluster. I just ride Ito Hikigo and swing out a rear guard. I check another stand trigger and add it to my hand. My opponent, thank God, doesn't have the Loris in their hand and they just ride Rivia. They call a couple more rears and start pushing again. I guard the first swing and take the second rear guard attack. The Vanguard swings alone for 13k, but again, my hand is only 10k shields, Perfect Guards, and the OT. I end up taking the hit and they hit a heal. Hit no defensives. They Superior Ride another Rivia, and then the grade 2 restands from it. They swing with Vanguard for 1 drive check, and I take it. Again, no defensive. I guard the last attack with OT. The turn passes to me. My hand is a Yasui and a bunch of grade 0s. I do draw the grade 3 for turn though, so I ride Yasui, then stride into train, and I make 2 Excel 2s. Off my 2 draws, I drew 2 Forktails. So I call 1 and put a Shoujo Doji and a Soul. I then just swing with my Vanguard. I hit a draw and a crit, putting my opponent to 2 damage. I then call only 1 Forktail off train skill because 1 Forktail's in my hand and 1's in damage. I do the Forktail again to get another Soul. I then swing 13k at the grade 2, which he lets hit. I then swing 33k at Vanguard and they G-guard it. Doing end phase, my Forktail goes back to the bottom and I call it back out from Yasui's GB2 skill. I then put another card into Soul. This turn was super lackluster for my deck, and being able to win from here is going to be really hard. The Forktails hopefully thin out my deck enough here. On their stride turn, they stride Heltrata and call a rear guard. They swing 16k and I guard it. They swing 27k and I take it. They swing with Vanguard and use Heltrata's skill to bounce their hand back and call 2 more rears. I Perfect Guard their Vanguard, discarding Forktail. They check 3 blanks. They then swing with Rivia and I 2 to pass it. They hit the crit and pass it to rear and then a blank. They don't have another Rivia to ride, so they just swing with the 37k 2 crit rear and I Perfect Guard that attack. This next turn is do or die. They have very little shield value, so if I get a strong turn, I can 100% take them to 6 damage. I ride Snake and stride into Shibaraku Victor. I call Ito Hikigo and do Vanguard skill. My top 7 search wasn't great. I found the Shirayuki though and added Yasui to hand. I called them both and used Shirayuki skill. I go to battle phase, swing for 16 to their 8. They take the first hit and hit the Eradicators, putting them at base 18 and drawing a card. I'm then forced to swing with Ito Hiki Girl to call out another Shirayuki to minus the power again. Now it's 17k versus 13k. They guard that attack. I swing 17k again. He guards. I then call a Shibaraku Victor from G-Zone. I then swing with Vanguard. He no guards, and I check a draw trigger. He hits a defensive draw trigger. At this point, I can't win this turn. So I swing at the Rias and try to weaken their turn as much as possible. I do have 3 heals in deck, so it might be possible. They call a full board. I take the first attack, hit a blank. I guard the next attack, and they attack again, which I take, and it was another blank, and I lose the game. This game, my deck just bricked super hard. There's very little I can do early game, and my grade 3 turn was too lackluster to be able to win on the following turn. The way you're able to win this matchup is if you are being aggressive against them too, and I just didn't have that aggression this game. All right, final round, round 7. I'm currently X2, and I look at my tiebreaker, and my tiebreaker is insane. I'm at the top of X2s, and I have almost a 0.7, which is really absurd. So if I win this game, I will top, more than likely. So this game is very much do or die for my tournament run. I'm going against Highlander. This deck is a bunch of 1-ofs, and it is super fast. Like the Rivia matchup, I need to play fast and force them to use cards in their hand to guard. I'm going second and end up riding Rainy Madam. I hit a crit on my first swing, which is a great start. They damage check the errata crit to draw, and then a heal. They end up riding Aqua with nothing to bounce, and another grade 1 that soul charges. They swing with Aqua for 10k, which I OT to pass. Then they swing with an 8k, which I take. I ride Ito Hikigil, then call Forktail, which puts Shoujo in the soul. I then swing and clone the Forktail. This Forktail gets me another Forktail in the soul. They roll lock my Vanguard swing, and I drive check a Yasui. My Forktail then attacks the rear guard, and my turn ends. On their grade 3 turn, they ride Loris and do the History Collection Shrine. They call a rear guard and regain resources. And that's it. I take the first hit and hit a stand. He swings with Vanguard, and I use a heal to gain plus 10k, putting my shield at 39k, which is a 2 to pass. They check blank blank draw. They do the Stride skill and call a grade 1 on the force markers, which my quick shield blocks. On my turn, I ride Yasui and call the snake. I go into train and clone the snake off Yasui skill. I then call a Shirayuki to minus power. I swing 13k, they guard. I swing 18k, they take it and hit a heal. I swing 17k to the 16k, and he guards. I swing with my Vanguard, and he takes it. I check a stand trigger, then a crit. They take 2 damage and hit no defensives. I use Train to call Forktail from my deck as a booster, so my snake hits harder. I swing 21k to the 16k. They guard. I then swing for 36k, and they go to 5. In the end phase, my Forktail goes back to deck, and I call it out again with Yasui. As long as I live this next turn, I should have enough gas here to close out the game. They ride Reindeer and stride into Heltrada. They end up only having a column to swing with. I G-guard this attack, and it lets me bounce the Shirayuki back to hand. They then swing with Heltrada and call only 1 rear guard. I no guard. They hit a crit, Anj, and Lupina. I check no defensives. They swing 28k, and I take it going to 5. No defensive there either. They swing with Reindeer, and I 2 to pass it. They check a draw and a blank. At this point, I'm looking through their deck list, and the only unit I cannot defend is Laura, which will call a full board with plus 10k. Most other good targets are out of the deck. They do the search off Reindeer, and they find it. They call a full board, they swing, and I take the hit, knowing only an OT can save me, and I check a blank, losing the game. I think I played it too safe on my turn at the end there. I could have called a Shirayuki off train to minus power again, putting them at 11k. I only had enough soul to activate 1 Shirayuki, but it would have given me the most attacks. The play I did do was better at trying to set up my deck to live the next turn as much as possible by deck thinning. But I need to try to not give them enough cards in hand to use Heltrada effectively. I hesitated, and that's what killed me there. Overall, I ended 20th place at 4-3. Looking after that tournament, I would have topped if I won either of those last 2 games. A bit of unluckiness and 1 misplay made that dream die. But the fact I was in that position is still really impressive for this deck. What started as a meme became a fairly real deck, and it can fight into a lot of these stronger decks. Thank you all so much for watching. This video was a long process, so if you did enjoy this, please share it around, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. That would be very much appreciated. If you want to see more content on this deck, again, in my Patreon, I'm going to have extra videos going with this deck. I don't know if by the time I release this on my channel, if those will be up just yet, yet, but if it's not up, it would be up in the coming days. One thing I'm hoping to do with my channel from here on out is making it more normal and more okay to try unconventional things. I think a lot of the time as players, we get fixated on trying to be the best player we can be and trying to win tournaments. But I think we should also be okay with just fucking around a bit. If you have a goofy deck idea, then try it. Never know what might actually be decent until you give it a shot. And you might have a ton of fun with it. You don't always have to play the most optimal deck. You can just pivot. That's what all the budget decks I've done in the past were made for, was to try to make it seem more okay that you don't need to buy these super expensive cards to have fun with the game. If this video sparked inspiration, then that makes me really happy, and I'm hoping I can see some more funny deck ideas in the future. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys in the next one.